Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames, messieurs, welcome to Then and Now, the weekly show, of course, I do with Jim Jatras, author of I Try to Warn You, the collected work of George Jatras, available on Amazon, Kindle, and all your fine booksellers. Links in the description below. We are joined this week by Conrad, one of the hosts and creators of World War Now, fantastic analytics show detailing all the everything from current events, current goings on, Ukraine, Russia, and global conflicts, and of course tying that into orthodoxy and the prophecies made for the coming World War that many believe we're firmly in, and we're just kind of experiencing it as it goes. So, here to give a bit of a sit rep of what's going on. So, give you a break from just me and Jim telling you what's going on. We'll have Conrad tell you what's going on. Hi, Conrad. Oh, you're muted, my friend. Can't hear you. Nope. Try again. There we go. There we go. There we go.
There we go. I wasn't muted on my end, so I was. I don't know. But I'm doing great. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jim. It's good to be here. Apologies for enforcing my tardiness on the rest of the audience, but forgive me. I just mixed up some time zones, so it's good to be here. Y'all show is on my regular viewing list, so I'm grateful to be here as always.
Appreciate it. And of course, Jim Jatras, the elder George Jatras here, who's going to be on a panel talking about geopolitics over on Expat Money Summit. So go to expatmoneysummit.com, get your free tickets. And if you sign up for any of the VIP packages and use the coupon code NOW, you get 20% off. This year, they're going to be centered around Latin America and talking about investment possibilities there. And Jim will be on the geopolitics panel, hosted by the mighty Mark Clare, good friend and colleague of the channel. Are you excited, Jim? You're going to be on a panel.
Yay!
Hey, I've been on some panels with Jim.
That's right. You were at the Ludwell. You were at the Ludwell conference. The conference is this weekend.
I've been on panels with Jim in other countries. I mean, it's
Yeah, exactly.
Why? You don't even need me here. I'm just an add-on. I'm just the guy who presses some buttons.
Speaking of other countries,
I will be in Moldova in like 9 days, assuming they don't prevent me from going.
Have you been to Moldova?
I've never been to Moldova before. I'm excited.
Yeah,
you're going with a whole
any
crew,
luck, you can
right?
get over to Transnistria.
Yeah, a few people. I know Buck Johnson, a few others, or James Dellingpole are going to be joining us, so it's going to be a good squad of journalists, and I'm going to hopefully get to go to Pridnestrovia, the PMR itself, in theory. So that will be quite cool. Father, I was asking Father John Whiteford about some tips, and he recommended a monastery there, and this little south of Tiraspol that apparently the abbot's a holy man. So we're going to be investigating all those sorts of things. We're only there for a few days, then we're heading to Russia. So gonna make the most of it.
Well, God bless you.
A few weeks ago, I ran into a priest who was actually from Pridnestrovia, and he said something that it was like a time warp, like a little piece of Russia, and then we both corrected ourselves and no, USSR. It's like a time warp back into the USSR, back in the US, back in the US. Actually, legally, this is funny. Legally, it might actually technically still be part of the USSR. In fact, it might be the only thing that's left.
That being said,
because when Moldova defeated, they did not grant a referendum to Pridnestrovia to remain in the USSR. So technically, they may still be in it.
Yeah, I think the only thing going against that is my favorite Transnistrian, my favorite Pridnestrovian, rather, don't want to use the slur as they call it, but Vadim Krasnoselski himself, the president of Pridnestrovia, he himself is a hardcore Russian imperial supporter, and he considers, even though obviously the aesthetics might say otherwise, he considers the Pridnestrovian Moravian Republic to be part of the Russian Empire, not part of the USSR. Yeah. So that's what I'm hoping to do. Yes, but
always one stubborn Russian. Like, niet, no. But he's still this. We have all the look at all the flags. We are not changing building. We keep building the way it is. Says CCP.
And the nationalists that refuse to recognize the Romanovs, and we can go farther and farther back, right? So
let's get to Russia Ukraine for a little bit. I've been busy with the live stream, so I haven't done my standard checkup on the situation. Although the general information out there is that Ukraine's still losing, and more and rapidly so. Do you have any specific details of what's going on? I know the war for Pokrovsk is still going on. I hear about multiple breakthroughs all over Donbass. And it looks like Russia continues to advance. I know there's been some exchange of territories, mostly small towns on the outskirts, but it looks like Russia's fully sweeping through Donbass at the moment. Any details you want to share on that, Conrad?
Yeah, again, it's not. We saw those big breakthroughs, what was it, 2-3 weeks ago now, that we haven't necessarily seen those capitalized on in as many massive gains as we may have been expecting. The Ukrainians are consolidating, but I think in many ways the Russians are they're finally kind of in that stage of really waiting for a sort of Ukrainian collapse, which unfortunately might now be getting pushed back as Trump seems to have sprung back into action, as it were. As people need to remember, Trump was the first guy to arm Ukraine, so to expect him to be the person to end it, I think everyone on this panel never really fell for that propaganda, so we don't have to do any apologizing, but many did. And many people fell for it, and people are, are sort of still being forced to cope about that situation. And Trump, what was it? He just sent missiles. What was it? I'm forgetting the acronym that are basically double the range of the ATACMS and the previous missiles that we had given them before. Yeah, the ERAM missiles. And so, I mean, if that's going to provide some kind of,
there are none of those to send. I mean, even the prototype of that is not available for October, and then once it goes into production, assuming it does, it won't be available, I think, till 2027. So it's it's just all smoke and mirrors.
I think the real indication is.
Sorry, quickly. We've seen this happen before, where they send missiles but they don't send the launchers, or they send the launcher but they don't send the missiles. So or the Ukrainians are trying to use missiles that don't work in the launchers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So. I think this is just more like, well, you buy them, we'll send them to you. Here, sign on the dotted line. Make money while this thing while Kiev burns.
And I think the Ukrainians probably correctly assume that the more money they give up, the more of these contracts they sign. It's sort of a goodwill signatory, between these groups. They don't want to, they don't want to have another episode like the Trump-Zelensky blow up, which which was probably the closest we got to seeing what really needs to happen, which is the U.S. washes their hands of this entire endeavor and let what happens. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem like we're going to see that anytime soon. We see Friedrich Merz talking about no Putin-Zelensky meeting. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Why did anyone ever even think that would happen? I also had no expectation that was ever going to happen, unless one of them somehow got arrested, by some victorious power. I think the only way that Putin and Zelensky are going to meet is with one of them potentially behind bars, and that depends on that will describe the situation, whether it went good or bad, I think, from our perspective. But I think, generally speaking, the Ukrainians right now, who knows if the Europeans are going to actually act on maybe 60% of their sort of coalition of the willing. They're trying to get people to actually put troops on the ground. I don't think that's going to happen, but we'll see what they can kind of muster short of that, because Trump, he has still, even if he is supporting Ukraine, he has still remained consistent on trying to pretty much offload everything, NATO spending and everything, on the Europeans, which, again, if you look at prophecies, that really ties into a lot of things, because St. Paisios talks a lot about German troops and other troops. He doesn't talk as much about American troops actually in a lot of these European theaters. So I think the way things are developing are once again tracking with kind of what those who paid attention to the Saints more so than other things might have predicted.
Maybe give the viewers a quick rundown in case they we're referencing it kind of ad hoc, but they might be coming to this for the first time. What exactly are the prophecies being laid out both by St. Paisios and by other Greek predominantly Greek Orthodox, right? I haven't.
Well, that's sort of
this is your wheelhouse better than mine. So explain the prophecies to the nice people.
Well, to not spend 45 minutes on this and have us be the whole show, the prophecies are basically just the consensus patrum of all of the saints who have spoken about the times preceding the end of the world, what will come after. For example, the Christian emperor, the Katakon, who's referenced in the New Testament, what will happen after he is removed, which I maintain is Tsar Nicholas II. His ritual execution at the hands of the Bolshevik Jews was the beginning, I think, of this sort of period that we're now 100 years later experiencing the Third World War. The Tsar and the First World War sort of opened the gates to this sort of unrestrained antichrist world that we're in right now. And if you want to read more about them specifically, I could give you a few, but I literally coincidentally have all of the books on the topic right here on my desk. So you can buy from the Eschaton Vigil. This is Prophecy of St. Paisios, Visions of World War III, which goes through all sorts of incredible prophecies from St. Paisios. Very Greek-focused. St. Paisios was a Greek nationalist, served in the Greek military. So a lot of these are about Greeks retaking northern Epirus, Greeks being given Constantinople after a Russo-Turkish war, which is probably the main prophetic angle that Jim, Jason, and I are kind of discuss the sort of direction towards on programs like this. The main version of this is the Eschatological Visions of the Blessed, which has all of these from St. Paisios, as well as a bunch of other saints, particularly Russian saints. That's sort of the big confluence, and how you know that this is, in my opinion, true, is that you have a huge overlap between Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, and then Greek, Serbian, Cappadocian, and even Georgian saints from the Holy Land, Cypriot saints that lived at different times, didn't know each other, didn't speak each other's language, yet they effectively all point towards the same direction geopolitically. And then for something even more in depth, you have the Nuclear Armageddon by Christos Roumanis, who personally knew St. Paisios fairly well and recounts a lot of his prophecies in here. And this has a bit of commentary, from a Greek, somebody that's sort of been in that world, raised with these traditions. He comments on it, and this is a fantastic book. Specifically, this one has the best chapter that currently exists in the English language about the prophecies about the return of St. John Vatatzis, who is, he was a Byzantine, or rather a Roman interregnum emperor of the Empire of Nicaea.
I like to call it the Romaic Empire to distinguish it from that period of Roman history. And certainly we got to retire that word Byzantine. I'm just tired of it.
Unfortunately, we have that's going to be our mission, is making sure that we replace the papists enough to where when people say Rome, they think of us, not them. That's going to be that's our struggle here in the West. But so I recommend this book to read more about the prophecies of St. John Vatatzis, a marble emperor who he was in the 13th century, much like the sleeper saints of Ephesus. It said his relics have been preserved incorrupt, almost in a sleeping form, beneath Constantinople. And in the midst of World War III, when the Russians do give Constantinople to the Greeks, he's going to rise up, and there's going to be a bit of a renaissance of orthodoxy as the true gospel is preached across the entire world. So I guess
why would they give Constantinople to the Greeks?
As St. Paisios claims, it is out of geopolitical necessity, which would make sense if they're stretched too thin, because the claim is that the Russians are going to make it all the way to Mount Tabor. And there's even claims that the Chinese are going to turn on them too.
Turn on the Russians, you mean?
Indeed. Which, that's Saint Seraphim Soloviev said that if Russia returns to something akin to communism, that's exactly what's going to happen. The Chinese are going to take the East.
Well, why would Russia be, as an if there, right? Why would the Russians return to something akin to communism?
I don't know. Ask Rokor. They published a statement about it recently.
Good point. Let me ask you a question. Any of the prophecies that are in these books I'm sure they cover different locations and different parts of history. Are there any things in there that you've looked at and said, yes, that has already happened? I mean, obviously we have the Israeli attack on the Iranians that was tied to the possibility of Erdogan shuffling off the scene. Erdogan's still there, but he's not looking good. Is there something you could point to and say, yep, that happened?
The big one, obviously, is, as you mentioned, Elder Theodore Agiofarangidis. He said that fateful Friday morning, you'll hear that the Jews have struck the Iranian nuclear capability. That happened exactly as he said it would happen.
I literally had a coffee spit when that happened.
It says you'll be drinking your morning coffee.
No, exactly.
Was it a Friday?
It
was a Friday.
So. Well, time difference here, right? So it might have been a Saturday. And I got up in the morning and had my cup of coffee, and I go on my computer and I had my morning prayer.
No, it was Thursday evening for me. I made sure I was looking Greek time. It was about 5:30 in the morning, Greek time, Friday.
There you go. So then I go on my computer as I often do, and I see the headlines, and I was like, Oh no!
And
It
look,
is
this
late
one
in
isn't
the
as talked about. St. Porphyrios did say things were all going to start going bad when America gets a black president. So I think that's
Really
then
say
when you
that?
think about,
Did he really
I believe so.
say that?
Yeah, I need to get the exact quote, but there
Oh,
is. It
man,
says that
I saw that.
the you know that the wars
Okay,
and things are coming will be
I'm
near
gonna
when
be a
America
believer
gets.
now. Yeah, you
There's
got
also, of
me
course,
now.
the nautical mile situation with the Greece and Turkey, which you might get into here in a second as we talk about some Turkish plane aggression against the Greek islands. But St.
Mhm.
Paisios did explicitly. It was him clarifying a prophecy from St. Cosmas. That's a lot of it as well. Not all, people attribute all of it to St. Paisios. A lot of it is St. Paisios clarifying the prophecies of St. Cosmas the Aetolian, who was prophesying to
Mhm.
the Greeks under the persecution of the Ottoman Empire at the time in the 18th century.
Mhm.
And he clarified, many people had been misconstruing. They thought that there was St. Cosmas had been talking about the Turks coming between 12 miles to 6 miles, and they thought that meant this one area in the north, or they thought that meant somewhere with Albania. He clarified that it meant the sort of nautical water economic zone barrier between the Greeks, which is the current sort of tension between Greece and Turkey. Greece have all these little islands right up against the Turkish mainland that allows their economic zone to effectively go right up to Turkey's shore. Turkey doesn't like that. And so it's no wonder that now that we're looking back on this, that is going to be ultimately what I think leads to a big escalation between Greece and Turkey, which is what I just described. And I believe that move from 12 to 6 miles off the coast of these Greek islands, that has technically already occurred.
Just quickly, thank you for everyone who's watching. Like, subscribe, and share the channel. Let the people know where we're at. Of course, we're going to be here on YouTube, Kick, Rumble, all the places. I'll be putting this episode up in all the places on Spotify and iTunes. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you're watching us there, send us some money. There's links for Streamlabs and PayPal and all the other places. Or sign up to a subscription, or do what you can to help fund the show. And I appreciate each and every one of you who do. Okay. So now we're already having rumbles about Iran-Israel Part 2. The speculations is that this is going to kick off very soon, in the fall. We also have in Europe the bond market, which some of the things I've been reporting on and following for the last year or so, is now reaching full. It's getting mainstream now. Now they can't ignore it. Right now, the British gilt market has risen over 15% in the last few weeks. Germany's following suit. France is also showing signs of economic collapse. Rumors that they're going to be reaching out to the IMF for bailouts. There's just not enough money in the IMF to cover, let alone UK, let alone 3 or 4 different countries. Germany can't bail anyone out anymore. So this isn't Greece in 2008. To 2010, although I think you're going to see a lot of the same austerity measures sweep Europe that happened in Greece. And then we're going to have Iran, Israel too, because why not, right? I mean, come on. if we're going to do this, guys, we might as well do this. We might as well do this with gusto. So what I found interesting, Conrad, and you can speak more of this, and I think this brings us into Greece, Turkey, and the waterways, is when the initial strikes happened and Israel began striking Iran, there was rumors that Netanyahu had fled or had relocated to Cyprus or somewhere in Greece temporarily. And I see a lot of reports of many Israelis, especially prominent Israelis, military people with money, going over to Greece and buying properties, which I find very interesting. Because granted, I mean, it's not that far away, but like, you know, without knowing what we know here, the question becomes, well, why Greece? Why not Jordan? Why not, wherever? Why specifically Greece? Is it just the weather? They like the ouzo? I don't know, right? So I find that's now we're starting to see things, little pieces come together, and that puts us into that prophecy of the direct Turkey involvement in this war, and eventually a square off with Russia. Which, I mean, I've been telling people this. Some people want to try to convince me that Russia and Turkey can be friends. I'm like, you don't. Then I don't. You've never talked to a Slavic person in your entire life, because we don't like the Turks. We don't even know why we don't like the Turks. We just don't like them, and that's never going to happen. If they sign a joint declaration of friendship, I tell you how much worth that paper is, because it ain't worth much. So, this all being said, there's your layup. Talk to me about Greece, Israel, and Turkey, and I guess Iran in there as well. The easy stuff, Connor.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll have to throw Russia in there too because it behests itself. But I think the as far as Turkey and Greece and Cyprus, and for the Israelis, why are they going there? I mean, Cyprus is literally like a 20-minute flight from Tel Aviv, so it's always been a sort of place that Israelis have gone. Russians and Russian Jews have gone. I mean, go to Limassol, it's all Russians, some of them Jews, of course. So it's just a big relevant part of the region, and of course, the northern 37% of the island is.
We just lost Conrad. Whoops.
I'm sure he'll be back. Well, let me continue with his vein of thought. I mean, yes, obviously, the geography favors that kind of relationship. For the longest time. Well, he's back. Let him continue now.
All right, are we good? I don't know where I was stopped, but as far as the Limassol and these whatnot.
Yeah.
As far as why the Israelis may want to go to these places specifically, I mean, it's obvious in the sense that Greece is the closest NATO country that is not ostensibly an enemy of Israel, as Turkey is supposedly right now. It's also Cyprus, the Republic of Cyprus is also by extension effectively like there's literally British bases that refuel Israeli jets, so it's very much an ally. But specifically with Cyprus, there's an easy way to bring Iran in, which is there's all these rumors that the IRGC is secretly training on northern Cyprus, which I'm very skeptical of because Turkey and Iran aren't exactly friends. Like, I don't think that Turkey would be allowing Iran to actually have any kind of strategic presence there. If the Iranians fell,
especially after the collapse of the Astana process and the fall of Syria, I mean, that was a huge betrayal of Turkey, of their common understanding with the Russians and the Iranians.
Exactly. I don't see how the Syria situation could have happened at all if Iran and Turkey were at some agreement where they could actually have that level of cooperation. Unfortunately, I mean, this is Israeli propaganda, largely speaking, I think, to have permission to escalate against Turkey. And look, think about it at an even more basic level. The Greater Israel Project is ongoing. They're expanding in all directions. Why wouldn't they expand that way too? I mean, in the most basic sense, they're moving into southern Lebanon. They're moving in. The settlers are already in Mount Hermon in Syria. They're about to annex the West Bank. Trump literally just gave them the green light. They're obviously moving into Gaza. We know they want the Sinai back. They're bombing Yemen. They're bombing Iran. Well, it may be the ocean, but just a few miles off the shore is a beautiful little island where you can set up shop and you secure more mineral resources, because that's a big reason why Erdogan is so interested in Cyprus to begin with, is all the resources you get if your economic waters are off the coast of Cyprus. And I think the idea that if the Iranians are foolish enough to have sent troops to train in northern Cyprus, that's entirely for the Turks to gain intelligence on them, if anything about that is actually true. So I think my perspective on this whole region and where it's going, ironically enough, hinges very much on two other countries that will then bring these other countries in. Those two countries are Russia and Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan, I think, is probably the country that punches the most above its weight as far as geopolitical relevance goes, mostly just due to its geography. It borders Iran, Russia, and of course has the Nakhchivan exclave bordering Turkey, and very close to Syria too. So the fact that the Azeris were able to basically pull one over on the Russians in the past few years, convinced them that it would be worth it to betray Armenia, and then just immediately betrayed them again, which if the Russians were actually a bit more red-pilled about how things work regarding Israel and the people that run that country, they probably could have seen this coming. But unfortunately, Azerbaijan, Israel's pretty much closest Islamic ally in the region, they are the same state basically as Turkey. The saying is they're one nation, two states. And if you realize, then you sort of understand that the whole Turkey-Israel thing is a bit of kayfabe. Hakan Fidan announced for like the third time that Turkish ships were not going to be docking at Israeli ports. Well, the Turkish Shadow Fleet within the hour was still docking there. I guess he was telling the truth if maybe Turkish flagged ships aren't going to be there. But ultimately, we know that if it wasn't for Erdogan himself, who may harbor some sort of realpolitik perspective and be trying to leverage the Islamic world against NATO and Israel, once he's gone, I see Turkey fully abandoning whatever support for Hamas they had and fully falling in line with Israel, turning against Russia. And if Russia, unfortunately, is in a similar boat to Turkey, where they, even though they are allies with Iran, they seem super, super remiss to even begin to betray Israel. Putin would rather talk about the 2 million Russian-speaking Israelis than talk about supporting Iran in the 12-day war, it seems. They're basically going to be forced.
Let me ask you a question about that, because the Russians, we'll talk about Ukraine a little bit, but they do seem to be utterly oblivious to some of what's going on. I mean, of course, Pashinyan in Armenia is a traitor. But the Americans, the Azeris, and the Turks stole the Caucasus right out from under the Russians' nose. Like, oh, no problem. And you hear some of the commentators online, well, that's no problem. This doesn't really affect Russia's interest. Of course it does. I mean, how oblivious can they be? They obviously, now you can talk about what happened in Syria and how Assad turned down support from the Russians and the Iranians, but nonetheless, a huge strategic, and it seems like they're out to lunch. I mean, you'll be able to ask them more directly. Just ask them a question. Hey, why are you guys out to lunch? I mean, what does it take for them to figure out what's going on here?
I mean, specifically with the Caucasus, I mean, the last two Nagorno-Karabakh wars, it seems to me that they literally funded the worst case scenario for themselves. I hope Jason can come back.
Yeah.
He's back. But what happened was they basically, as far as I could tell, they kept Pashinyan in power, despite popular uprising likely being prepared to take him out, for the purpose of allowing Azerbaijan to win the war, to take Nagorno-Karabakh, under what I'm assuming is an idea that the Turks would have allowed them to be the security guarantors of this Zangezur corridor plan that's now happened. What happened? Obviously, the Azeris, who are basically the Jews of the Caucasus, immediately just betrayed the Russians, went along with the Turks and said, let's just get the Americans to do this. They kept Pashinyan in power. And then apparently, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, the Russians then realized, whoopsie doodle, we messed up. Now we got to fund this coup from these church figures, and it totally failed. I don't know if that was like a real effort. I don't know if that was just those guys trying to get Russian support, but the Russians basically thought that betraying the Armenians would turn out in their favor. They then got obviously betrayed by the Turks involved, the Azeris, the Turks themselves, and now here we are. Russia's been entirely encircled. Their only hope at this point in the region is Iran, and to empower Iran to be able to, if in a confrontation, totally take out Azerbaijan, which as far as they can tell, they're not willing to do. The Russians are vociferously denying the rumor that they provided, Iranian launch codes and locations of missile defense systems to the Israelis. I'm skeptical of that myself, but if you want to disprove the rumors that you did that, why don't you give them some more weapons? Why don't you sign an actual security guarantee with Iran like you have with North Korea?
Well, part of the problem there is you got Pezeshkian in Tehran, and he's always been very friendly with the business community there. And you'd think after what happened with the 12-day war, he would wake up and smell the kvass and decide that, this is just not, that road is a dead end. But even now I saw a headline today, Iran still open to negotiation with the United States. I mean, how stupid do you have to be to realize?
Well, Pezeshkian is an Azeri Kurd himself. He's an Azeri Kurd himself. So, how loyal is he really to the, to the actual Persian, revolutionary power structure?
And the supreme leader is also half Azeri too. So, but again, I mean, that's not necessarily an indication of loyalty because it is a multi-ethnic state. But nonetheless, you think at some point they realize that negotiating with people is simply a facade for trying to take you down. And how can they not see that?
No, and I think I completely agree. And of course, we've recently seen the reports, like I just mentioned, North Korean troops have been in Kursk. We've seen big reports out of that. We got to remember, Iran hasn't sent troops, but Iran are the main drone suppliers in the Ukrainian war for the Russian side. They're the main. There was a time when the only sodas you could find in Russian grocery stores were in Farsi. The Russians do owe some sort of debt to the Iranians. Obviously, the Iranians also, know they owe the Russians for supporting them amidst grand sanctions as well. But at the end of the day, if the Russians really are willing to allow Iran to completely fall to regime change or to complete irrelevancy, I mean, because we hear that the Russians are the ones telling the Iranians to give up on domestic enrichment. If that is true, I mean, I don't know how else to, do they want to get Balkanized? Do they want to, is that their goal? Do they want to get surrounded? Because at that point, you might as well just give up on every other surrounding area. Finland's in NATO, you lose Iran.
This relates to the bigger question back with the Russians. I mean, have they got their heads screwed on straight? Do they really see that there is simply no, I hate to say no substitute for victory? I mean, that the idea that are they still holding out the fantasy that somehow this is all going to result in an agreement with somebody?
Or we throw this monkey wrench into the whole thing and say that they're all working for the same people.
That's
because the narrative that we've been playing with up until now is that Putin and the Kremlin and the oligarchs, deep state, whatever you want to call it, the Russians, are in a civilizational sovereignty mode, and that's what they want. And you can confirm that on the ground. Like there's no reason not to believe that. However, if you start to put into the idea of like, well, it's certainly looking a lot more like human sacrifice on the field of Ukraine. Now we're getting numbers of like 1.7 million Ukrainians either dead, killed, or missing or vanished. Let's say we haven't seen those numbers since World War II, or maybe let's say Korea. And whether or not this is Russia's plan to break Ukraine, to make them to do what they did in Chechnya to Ukraine, or whether they're saying, well, look, you're the meat, we're the grinder. You keep feeding us, we're going to kill you. We're going to kill you all. The results are the same. Even if we can then maybe give them a bit of an out and saying they're not really working for all the same people, but if the results are the same, then the results are the same. Because we can throw in the bugaboo of the Greater Israel Project, which I don't think is maybe it's on the back heel or maybe it's being readjusted, but I think that plan is still going ahead to link Israel proper, Iran, Syria, Jordan, all those other places, all the way up into Ukraine through the Black Sea. And one of the best ways of doing that would be to hollow out Ukraine and get rid of all its fighting age men of a certain age. And now that's all you got to go. You just shared something on X recently where it was a picture of a university in Kiev or something like that. And it was like 40 students, and I think there was like 2 guys, and the rest of them are all women.
All female, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's not, and again, gender policy, sure, yeah. But it's also because there are no more men left, or the men that are left are in hiding. Because they're still pulling men out on their 18th birthday to serve them and to push them on the front lines. Or
and they allowed Zelensky just allowed 18 to 22-year-old men to leave the country, and I'm sure a lot of them have.
Right.
Why would he do that?
Evacuate.
Well, I think he might. My speculation was that he did it because he thinks that he's probably going to face some kind of internal revolt once he inevitably decides to concede when he realizes it's over on the battlefield. So he's going to get rid of all these guys that would, in theory, join up with some nationalist militia, drag them out in the streets, and string them up.
Well, we can be hopeful about that. I mean, look at the Parubi assassination in Lvov. Maybe these guys will start turning on each other like scorpions in a bottle. But it's still, again, for me, the big question always is, what do the Russians intend to do? Even if they kill off every man in Ukraine, even if the Ukrainian army collapses, are they still going to say, okay, now we can make a deal. You come and sign an agreement, or are they going to just figure out there will never be a deal, at least not one that will be honored by their partners, and they just have to take control of the entire country one way or the other? They can maybe have a rump state that's controlled by a puppet, like put Medvedchuk or Azarov or somebody like that in there. But the idea that they're going to sign a deal, say, you still have people talking about the Austrian model of 1955. Ukraine can be a neutral country. I think that ship sailed a long time ago. There's simply no way that deal will ever be honored by the Western powers if it stops Russia from taking control of all of Ukraine. They can say, "Phew, we dodged a bullet there. Now we can build this thing up again."
Yeah, I think there's all sorts of potential angles as far as what's going to actually happen on the government side of things. Obviously, right now the world is just sort of, everybody knows that any dramatic change is going to shake things up to the benefit of the other side. That there's always, I think both sides, unfortunately, are trying to maintain a bit of a status quo, with the Russians assuming the attritional warfare will eventually just get to the Ukrainians. I mean, look at the battlefield right now. The situation with Zaporozhye and Kherson, the Russians are right there. Like they're right there. There's obviously a conscious decision to not just go right in, than to do what they did to Mariupol or Bakhmut or any of these places, to these cities. And I think, unfortunately, Putin is still holding out that he's going to be able to get those cities in negotiations. And if you're getting those cities in negotiations, what you're definitely not getting in negotiations is Odessa, Nikolaev, some of these other places.
Well, look, I'd be the last one to suggest you want to do Bakhmut on a broad front against other cities like Odessa or Kharkov and so forth. When I keep asking those, why do they not target the command and control of the regime? Why is the presidential administration, the SBU, military intelligence, the Rada, why are those organizations all still in operation? I mean, if the Ukrainians could hit those structures in Moscow they would, and they've tried, but the Russians don't hit that in Ukraine. In other words, they don't look to be actually trying to decapitate the regime the way the Israelis decapitated Hezbollah and tried to decapitate the Iranians. Why not?
It's a good question. And I think the situation comes with I mean, look, the Ukrainians are still able to launch drones from like within Russia. I mean, look at Israel. Israel is able to effectively kill anybody they want inside Iran. And look, obviously the Russians, they're close with the Israelis. I don't know exactly how aware they are of these things, but if Israel can do something, the United States can probably do something. You know, these are pretty similar capabilities. And I think, I don't know if Putin is afraid. I mean, you hear all these rumors that his people collect even his, these sorts of things. He's extra cautious, which obviously I would be. You have to be. And I think in many ways, there's this sort of, I mean, it's part of why they even suppress it's another reason why they might suppress some of a certain patriotic element within Russia as well, because I mean, they're afraid that those people, if they're empowered too much, I mean, I think the Russians are even afraid of looking back at the beginning of the war. I think they consider what they did in 2014, arming the militias, to have been such a gamble that, it was barely even worth it. I think that was probably a harder decision than going in 2022 was, if I had to think about, the actual war room at the time. So I think, unfortunately, there's still, look, it goes back into the name of my show. I call it World War Now, but everyone's afraid to be the first one to announce it, because if you're going to be the one to announce that it's World War III, you better be ready to frame it the right way, because if it's World War III, there's good guys and there's bad guys, right? Just like the last two world wars, at least that's what they told us. And if there's good guys and bad guys, you better be ready to convince them you're the good guys.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, as we know, there's really no good guys or bad guys. There's just results that you can live with or can't live with, depending on which.
Exactly. That's why it hasn't been framed as World War III yet, because there's no way to even convince a normie there's good guys or bad guys, at least not enough of them yet. And something's going to have to happen, and that's why I'm fearing the eternal false flag. And I mean, it's been 24 years. I mean, why couldn't another 9/11 happen?
Well, given how the Ukraine and the Middle Eastern theaters of what is increasingly obvious as a global conflict are starting to have more intersection between the two of them. The only thing we're waiting for now is for the third theater in the Western Pacific to kick off against the Chinese, and that's I don't know if that's going to heat up at some point or not.
Well, what do you think of this speculation? Someone once said to me that they think the real World War theater will be in Central Asia, because that seems to be where a lot of more interests actually really combine. Whether it be for oil resources, positioning, geography, etc. And the more I think of it, the less I can disagree, because that would definitely put Russia and China on a war front. India and a few other players.
Well, again, if you're looking at one of the sides in this World War, essentially the thalassocratic American Empire versus a Eurasian grouping, that was one of the main reasons we stayed in Afghanistan for so long, to be able to strike in Central Asia, interdict the Belt and Road and all that, and that was a real strategic setback for that empire, because they don't really have a way to get easily to Central Asia anymore.
Right.
No, that's completely true. And we discussed this on our stream with Steve Su recently about China and Taiwan on the battlefield. And this is being played out in Ukraine, in the Black Sea in particular, which is part of why I think the Black Sea is going to be such a surprising and dynamic place when it finally goes hot there more far in the south, is because right now the missile technology has completely shifted the balance of power in favor of land powers over sea powers. There's no way to defend aircraft carriers and destroyers against hypersonic missiles. It just doesn't exist right now. And so if you're going to deploy your thalassocratic, merchant fleet that has secured the world for the past 75, 80 years, well, it's going to be a pretty big deal when it gets absolutely destroyed in the Southwest Pacific or the Black Sea by a military that is objectively weaker than you, but you decided to put your ships in range of their most powerful weapons, and that's going to go a certain way. So it's a big part of this cat and mouse game. It's why the Americans are so remiss to lose Taiwan, because if things have to go hot there, then anything. I mean,
Yeah.
anything short of that is going to easily be destroyed by the
and we could
Chinese.
lose it,
But
by
we
the way.
just saw the parade. You just saw that Chinese parade. That was impressive. Compare that to the
Yeah.
Trump parade. I'm sorry, like I'm not trying to spout Chinese propaganda, but night and day.
Yeah, and of course we could very easily lose Taiwan if the Kuomintang comes back into power, and they may decide that they really need to move forward with patching things up with the mainland and get the Americans out, because otherwise they know they're going to turn into Ukraine. They're going to be the meat packages for that war if it ever breaks out.
Okay, so you mentioned Odessa and we'll just have to wrap this up very quickly, gentlemen. Thank you again for coming on, Conrad and Jim, always for giving us your time. But just one quick note about Odessa, because I think from my analysis, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, boys, but I think Odessa is the crown jewel, and it almost is Russia's entire reason for being in this conflict. Crimea, obviously, in 2014, annexing that, and then taking that whole waterway, both for exports of oil and gas, and also just because then Russia's always been landlocked. So take those waterways and seize them and control them has, I think, always been the ultimate game plan for Russia. Everything else is just everything else. So if that's true, and then that would put, I would say, the seizure of Odessa, and now we're getting reports that Russian special forces are getting fully embedded in Odessa. The strikes on Odessa have been going on since the start of the war, but they've been much more strategic. That's something that a lot of Western press isn't really covering, is how strategic Russians have been. Ukrainians will post civilian death numbers, but really, in the grand scheme of war, it's very, very small. Not that we're excusing anything, but at the same time,
especially when you compare it to Gaza.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's not even bring that one up, but for many reasons. But so in Odessa, they've been striking Odessa for years now, but it's been pinpoint, and they've been striking military targets and warehouses and stockpiles, all the rest of it. So they've been moving on Odessa throughout the entire war. I think seizing Odessa is key, and once they do that, that puts them in direct conflict with Turkey. Because now Turkey, just late last year, beginning of this year, said that they found a large gas supply in the Black Sea, maybe in the sort of northern Caspian or something like that, that they're moving on. So it's like that whole waterway, as soon as Russia basically seizes it and gets in control of their Black Sea territory, the conflict with Turkey is like fait accompli at that point. And then that puts us into more mobilization across the Black Sea. Like, as you were saying, Black Sea, I think, is going to be the focal point for the next wave of this conflict.
And again, it all ties into it sort of ties into my justification for what people would, of course, call outlandish claims based on these prophecies, right? People are like, you really think the Russians are going to take Odessa? They can't even take Kherson. I don't even think they might want to. I think they're going to be forced into this. Jim's been hearing me say this for years. They didn't want to go in 2022. They were basically forced to make that decision. I don't think they wanted to fund and send in Igor Strelkov in 2014. They clearly gamed it out and realized that was what they had to do, despite the fact that it ostracized them from the rest of the world. So I think Black Sea total northern control by Russia is inevitable.
Conrad. And where is Strelkov right now?
Prison. Yeah. And I think the reality, though, is he's got 2 more years. I pray that he can get out sooner. He's a Orthodox Christian brother, but I think in many ways we have to look at the Turkish situation as well and how these things are going to go. An argument I had with a Turk about this, actually, because Turks, look, if you want to be like me and talk about Turkey this much online, you have to be prepared. These people, there's no country where people like talking about geopolitics more than people from Turkey. Maybe people from Greece. The problem is there's a lot more people from Turkey than there are people from Greece. So you have to.
That's because of the same. That's Conrad, because they're the same people.
Yeah, it's the same. As I'm saying, it's these dang people, and we've got and 2/3 of them are convinced that they're Muslims.
I'll take the hate watches, guys. Just hate watch it for. Just leave a comment. I don't care. That's fine. It's all interaction at the end of the day.
But I was arguing with a Kemalist, of course, who's saying all this stuff. He's like, "You imbecile! You have no idea. Once Kemalists take power, we will ally with Russia against like the West and all this kind of stuff." And I'm like, "Who is going to say this?" And he starts citing all this Kilich Daroglu stuff. I'm like, "Dude, 3 weeks ago, Kilich Daroglu lost the leadership vote for his own party, and now it's Imamoglu." And it's like, and then he's like, "Well, you know, he's going to come back and he's going to overthrow Imamoglu again." I'm like, "Bro, you're just completely conceding how things are going to go. Whatever faction within Kemalism that was potentially going to cool things down, they're gone. You've got this guy who's now in prison at behest of Erdogan. If Erdogan keeps escalating against Israel, it's a perfect color revolution. I mean, they already had the biggest protests in Turkish history, like 2, 3, 4 months ago over this guy. They can snap that right back on again. Imagine what Israel can do. Imagine what they can do if they activate the Kurds. The SDF still hasn't integrated into Syria. This thing is very much still going to happen. And when Imamoglu takes power, it's going to be right there. He's going to say, well, the Russians can't have that much control over the Black Sea. And frankly, Erdogan still feels the same way. Why would Erdogan be talking about the irrelevant, non-existent Crimean Tatar population of Crimea and how they were oppressed by the Russians if he wanted to allow the Russians to keep having Crimea?
Yeah, I know. It's people just that I find it the most amazing thing since doing the show. You do all this analysis and you go, look, it's just A plus B equals C, right? Like this is reality and this is how these things work. And people go, no, but in my head canon, Russia and Turkey are going to be best friends, and they're going to put away thousands of years of animosity. And okay, and like
I think that's going to emerge to be like the retard multipolarity, maybe even MAGA communist tier take. They're going to be like that actually believe their own their own farts about Turkey supporting Hamas, and that Russia and the Islamic world are the real best allies, and that all this kind of stuff, which. I mean, we've all known that's a crock of crap since this. It's basically
basically the readership of Kiev Independent of that wonderful newspaper, which
the followers of Haz al-Din,
right? Gentlemen,
I think
go ahead. No, please, Conrad, finish up.
No. I was just going to say, I think in general, it's one of those examples where maybe there is a large faction in the Russian leadership that does want to have everything shift towards the East and the Islamic world, but that's just not how things are going to play out. The Russians, they have their plans. God has his plans, and I think God's one that's going to ultimately win out here.
Well, there are Eurasianists who would like to do that, who would like basically say that we have more in common with the Islamic world, particularly the Shiites, than we do with Europe. And frankly, I just don't buy that. I mean, obviously, heterodoxy in the West is a huge problem post-Christianity, but we don't, as Orthodox, have anything much to speak of in common with Islam, any kind of Islam.
Agreed.
We'll end on that. God bless you, gentlemen. Thank you, chat, for tuning in, and all the people watching this in the future. Go buy your copy of I Try to Warn You by James George Jatras. Go get your copy. Get your tickets for Expat Money Summit. Links in the description below, so you can see Jim on the panel talking about geopolitics. Of course, go follow Conrad Fan over World War Now. Your biggest base is on Substack, if I'm not mistaken, Conrad.
Yes, sir. WorldWarNow.co.
If I don't have the links in the description, I will add them. But go over to Substack, download the app, and go follow Conrad also on X as well, both under World War Now and Conrad Fran. And of course, me. Hi, Jason Mironchuck, host of creator of Mironchuck Now.
There's the Z. There should be a Z there.
Franz. Have I been saying Franz?
I missed it. Franz.
I just read what you put in front of me.
I typed it in wrong.
I would be the perfect teleprompter. I would be the perfect teleprompter.
Type your own damn name.
Yeah.
Yes, I was trying to correct. I was typing so fast, trying to not be late. So
look, I'm not mispronouncing it this time. Okay, this is not me mispronouncing it for once.
That is correct. I just forgot my own name.
Screwing me, Conrad. Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames and messieurs, thank you so much for liking and subscribing and doing all the things with the show. I appreciate each and every one of you. We'll be back next week. I am Jason Mironchuck, and it's later than you think.